Okay, so stay with me because this is going to sound super dodgy, but I promise it's going to make sense. I don't know if you pay attention to Alex Jones, the absolutely out there right-wing conspiracy guy. Well, this week, he claimed that acceptance of transgender rights is going to lead to an all-new class of augmented humans, or cyborgs, that will be the most protected class of people and society. For once, Alex Jones, I hope you're right. To that end, this week's Patreon dollars are going straight to the Transgender Cyborg Research Project because that shit sounds amazing. This week, Danny heard the call and decided to step up and fund our glorious cybernetic genderless future. Thanks, Danny. Your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Atheist Manifesto. Hello, dear friends, and welcome to the Atheist Manifesto. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined once again by my fabulous co-host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
I got a little bit jump scared by the sudden way you said hello. You're just like, hello, everybody. And we do like the 5 seconds of silence or whatever for the recording purposes. And it's like, fuck, okay, here's Callie, everybody. Just like always.
I'm doing my best to do like the professional radio announcing voice. And I don't know, maybe I went overboard. I'm sorry.
You could be like, hello, this is Callie Wright here on FM 98.9 coming at you tonight with some love songs, some smooth jazz. We got a shout out here from Shelly to James. Shelly wants to play Backstreet's Back for you, James, and she says, hey, how you doing? And now on with the song.
I'll keep that in mind for next episode. You just try a couple of approaches and we'll see what sticks.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm into it. So I've been thinking a lot lately about the narratives that we're forced to fit into. And of course, this applies to everyone. I think everyone feels some pressure to fit into specific narratives based on who they are, the parts they're born with, the society they're born into, that kind of thing. And queer and trans folks definitely have our fair share of those specific problems. And I gave a talk to my local atheist group recently. It was their yearly sex meetup, which is one of my favorite things that happens throughout the course of the year. And you might remember my talk from last year, How to Fuck a Trans Woman, where I was like super snarky and hopefully funny about this weird journey through sex and sexuality as a trans woman. And so this was the same event. And I spent a lot of time struggling about what I was going to say at this meetup this year. And the thing is, I don't have much to say about sex at this point, other than I'm super fucking frustrated by the fact that it's been 6 months since I've had an orgasm. Still recovering, and I go back and forth between being able to be patient with that process and being super frustrated by it. And that's where I am lately, but like that's not what a group wants to hear at a sex meetup, right? I'm supposed to tell funny and right, like, I'm supposed to tell funny and awesome and amazing stories about my sex life post surgery because new shiny science vagina. I was censoring myself, and I was trying to give the talk that I thought people wanted to hear instead of the one that I actually wanted to give, and this got me thinking about the ways that we sometimes censor ourselves to fit a narrative. And this happens on the loving and affirming and accepting side of things too. I've seen lots of trans folks criticized for being open with their struggles because they're told it comes off as ungrateful to finally get access to this transition stuff they need and then to complain about it. Like, what a bunch of ingrates, right? But you know what? Fuck that. Like, sometimes this stuff is really hard, and sometimes even the good stuff is hard. And so I posed this question on Facebook. I asked for folks to tell me stories about times they felt pressured into censoring themselves or being less than honest about their experiences because of that pressure to fit into a specific narrative. And we're going to share some of those stories here this week. And then I'm going to end the episode with a recording of my talk from that meetup. So Ari, do you have any opening thoughts, any stories that come to mind about your own experience, the time where you felt like sort of pressured to sugarcoat your story or maybe not tell a complete story about where you're at because of this kind of thing?
Nothing really comes to mind. And I think a lot of that is because, as I've stated many times on this show and on The Sister Getting Out of Hand, I'm pretty much a cutout non-binary person stereotype. So I already fit into a lot of the expectations that people have for non-binary people. And for some reason, I'm not sure exactly why this is, and maybe I'll need to do more thinking about this, but it's also something I brought up on the show before as well, is that when it comes to my gender and my sexuality, I've never really had trouble accepting myself for who I am, which I know is not something that everyone experiences. I know there are a lot of people out there who struggle a lot with whatever narratives they were taught as children and even as adults growing up in this culture, or feeling like, the way that I am is wrong. I need to change myself. And for some reason, I've never really felt that way about my gender and sexuality, even though I've felt that way about a lot of other things about myself. And I'm not sure quite why that is, but there's not really a lot about me that is super drastically outside of what people expect for an assigned female at birth non-binary person. Like the way that I dress and present myself is pretty androgynous as you would expect. And I think sometimes people are surprised to learn that my favorite color is pink and that I still sleep with the same stuffed animal that I got for my 12th birthday. But other than that, there's not much to say on that. Maybe I'll think of something else as we hear some other people's stories, or as you tell some things that you want to talk about.
Yeah, well, and that's awesome, because that should be everyone's experience, right? We should just be able to ask the question, who am I? And honestly answer that question and have people say, okay. But of course, I mean, I guess if that's the world we lived in, this podcast wouldn't exist, right? So I picked a couple of posts. There were a lot of responses on this, and I want to apologize to anyone who is listening but didn't get their response read. I picked the ones that resonated the most with me personally, and the ones that sort of trigger stories in my head about things that I experienced and things that seem to be sort of common across a lot of stories that I heard. So the first story we're going to hear is from Maz, and I'm just going to read what Maz wrote. The first thing that comes to mind is pretty much constantly lying to my doctors about my non-binary identity in order to even be allowed to transition. It's easier to tell them that I've A, known I was trans my whole life, B, am 100% a binary man, C, experience no mental health problems, than tell the truth, because doing the latter labels you as, quote, not really trans, or, quote, mentally unstable and unable to transition. You and I know that transitioning can stabilize mental health far more than suffering dysphoria does, but a lot of doctors, at least in my experience, will just deny you the services you know you need if you don't fit into what their idea of a trans person is like. So you lie. It's dangerous as hell, sure, but when your own identity, even as a subset of trans people, needs to be buried in order to access life-saving treatments, it's a reminder of how far I still have to go to be confident in standing up for my own identity and not letting people define my identity for me. I'm lucky enough to be seeing doctors and therapists that respect my identity now, but my first endocrinologist wanted to delay my transition until I was deemed, quote, sufficiently stable after a suicide attempt. Without Planned Parenthood, I likely would have attempted suicide again before that time period was up. I mean, and a lot of this comes down to medical gatekeeping, right? You have to figure out that you're the right kind of trans to access transition. And of course, this sort of harkens back to the not queer enough, not trans enough episode. And I guess this is sort of an extension of that subject, in that, the right kind of queer, the right kind of trans. I had to take a test, an evaluation called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. And it's supposed to just be a sort of general diagnostic tool for mental illness. And the way that it was phrased to me is like, well, this isn't a test to see if you're trans, but it's just sort of a test to see where you're at with mental health so those problems can be addressed. And the way that it was told to me was that, like, if there were any problems found, that those problems would have to be addressed before I was allowed transition care. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, so I don't think that I have clinical levels of depression or anxiety that, require significant therapeutic intervention or medication. Like, I do struggle with those things, but it's not something that is it brings my everyday life down. So it's like, I don't really think that I have anything to worry about from this. But then again, I'm thinking in my head, well, a lot of people do. And those problems are exacerbated by the dysphoria that people suffer and the way that they're treated for being trans. And And my understanding is that this is common among people who treat trans patients, therapists who treat trans patients, that like, I'm all for like, let's figure out where you're at with mental health before we move forward, because that's important, right? We want to know where folks are at. But as a method of gatekeeping, like that's an immediate encouragement to lie, right? Do some research on the internet and figure out what the test wants from you to say that you're quote unquote healthy.
Yeah.
Right. I have a friend who didn't comment on the post, so I won't go super into detail or use their name, but they have a specific mental illness that they felt for a long time they had to lie to their therapist about before they were able to get hormone prescriptions, because they thought like, well, you know, if you're unstable, you can't get hormones. And like, well, part of the reason that I'm unstable is because my body's not right. Like, it's so frustrating.
I'm pretty lucky in that when it comes to people that I've seen for transition care, I've always felt safe enough to be honest about my mental health. And especially because I take medications and all of that, like I wanted to be sure there wasn't going to be any kind of medical interaction or concern with taking hormones. I wanted to do it safely. So I was honest and upfront with that. And for me, the mental health issues are not really related to dysphoria or transition. So they're just kind of separate parts of my life. So I have been pressured a little bit to kind of downplay my symptoms when I go to see doctors for transition related care, just because I don't want to cause any alarm bells to go off and have them think like, oh, well, maybe you're not in a stable place to be able to do this, which is kind of shitty. And then on the other hand, when I've gone to see doctors for psychiatric medication or any other medication, I typically don't bring up the fact that I'm trans, because I don't really want that to factor into it. It doesn't really have anything to do with it, and I don't want to run the risk of, again, some sort of discrimination from that end. So you can get discrimination from both ends when it comes to being trans and then mentally ill, whether the mental illness is related to your dysphoria or the way that people treat you in your life, or whether it's completely separate.
Yeah, and I've had that, you know, going to get care, just like physical medical care, you know, F is marked on my license, and F is where I'm marked in my insurance paperwork and everything like that. And so like standard questionnaire, when was the last time you had your period? Well, never had one of those because I'm trans. Like, you have to out yourself to answer these standard questions. Or like, you know, have you had a pregnancy test recently? Like, I can't just say, well, that's not really necessary, because like for folks who can get pregnant, you know, like there's a lot of misconceptions about like, well, you know, I used a condom, so there's no way I can be pregnant. So like, it's not necessarily wrong for doctors to want to know that kind of stuff in some circumstances, but you know, they ask these questions that are part of a standard questionnaire, and trans people are not in mind when they ask these questions.
Yeah.
You know, trust me, I don't need a pregnancy test, I promise. Oh really? Why not? Because I don't need a pregnancy test, I promise. Like Ali says, and this is one like, oh my God, I feel this so hard. Sometimes I feel like a self-hating trans. I think other trans people are so beautiful, but I hate my own body. I'm often afraid to share these things in case I accidentally invalidate another trans person. Oh my God, I feel this so hard. Especially early on, you know, pre-hormones, before I'd really figured out my presentation and like how I wanted myself to look and that kind of stuff. I mean, I would look and just like, look at these giant hands, my broad shoulders, my square face. I'm so fucking ugly, blah, blah, blah. And then I would think to myself, like, I have a lot of friends who kind of fit that description. Am I saying they're ugly? Well, no, of course not. It's different from me. Again, so many of these struggles apply to everyone, right? I feel like almost everyone has some sort of image issue at some point, because no one really fits the ideal, right? And there's always some level of pressure to fit that ideal. But like specifically trans folks, you know, if you're a trans woman and you're comfortable fitting into feminine stereotypes and that's not where you are physically, it can be a huge, huge thing. And that was, and there was at one point where I thought to myself, like, I am bringing myself down so hard and criticizing myself so hard. And I have so many friends who like have the same characteristics. You know, they have large hands, they have broad shoulders, they have like a stereotypically masculine looking face, or, you know, maybe they haven't had laser done or electrolysis done. I do not think those people are ugly. I don't think those people are bad looking, but I see all those things in myself and I think it's terrible. But like, if I say it about myself for those reasons, it applies to everyone. And there's so much unpacking I had to do surrounding that. And thankfully I'm in a place where those thoughts are pretty minimal. I don't dwell so much on that stuff anymore. But I am like Ali, I'm always cognizant of the way that I talk about those things in reference to myself, because I always think, like, especially, 5 years into transitioning now, aside from getting boobs, which I still want to do, like, I'm pretty much where I want to be, and that's a really privileged place to be in, because one, a lot of people don't get there at all, and two, especially a lot of people don't get there that fast. So yeah, that's something that that I'm always cognizant of too. And that's one of those things where I feel like censoring yourself maybe isn't the worst thing. Like, I hate to, it's a fine line to walk, because I don't want to say like, oh, you should never say those things and you should never be honest about the way that you feel, because I really do think we should be honest about the way that we feel. Of course, it's just important to understand the context that we're speaking in when we say those things, and how the things we say about ourselves might apply to other people. And I think that can be self-help, right? Because one of my favorite memes that I've ever seen on Facebook is like, all of those things that you say about yourself, if you heard somebody saying that about a friend of yours, you'd be really pissed off and you'd be, hey, don't treat my friend that way. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, well, apply that to yourself. You know what I mean? Be that friend to yourself. Be mad at yourself that you're saying those mean things. Be more gentle to yourself. And so that's kind of where that thought process has ended for me. But yeah, like, identify with that one's super hard.
When it comes to the accidentally invalidating another trans person, sometimes it comes up where I'll see someone in my Facebook feed who is talking about an experience that they've had where, for example, they've been misgendered, maybe once recently or maybe repeatedly, and they're feeling bad about it. And my immediate response might be like, what the heck? How could somebody misgender you? Like, you obviously look like whatever gender it is that you're presenting as. It doesn't even compute to me. And then I think in my head, but there are people who do get misgendered, and that's not their fault. And it's this whole blobby thing. Like, I don't want people who look at a picture of them and think that's where I want to be to like, I'm not doing it good enough. I need to, go get better at the whole passing thing. And then I'll have the right to complain when people misgender me.
Right. Like, I've thought about that a lot, because obviously when people say that kind of thing, it's very well intentioned and they're just trying to be affirmative, right? And that's a really good impulse. And so it's like, well, you obviously look like a woman. It's like, well, there are people who quote unquote obviously look like women who aren't, and like, we need to be cognizant of those things.
Yeah. So I want to be like, hey, like, fuck those people. You look awesome. And I don't understand how anyone could see you as something that you're not. But then at the same time, you gotta think about the other people who are going to be reading this and how they might be affected by seeing that kind of comment.
Yeah. And I've just come down on the fact of like, I'll just say, like, you are who you are and you look like who you are because you are who you are, and like, hashtag bad skeptic, like, that's circular logic, I know, but like, that's just how it is. And yeah. Anthony, this is kind of a longer one, but I feel like there's good stuff in here. I feel like I have to sit down and shut up about how I feel and not talk about my dysphoria or problems. When someone misgenders me, I smile and let it pass, pretending it doesn't bother me. Or when, for example, I'm shopping for makeup because I still wear it, someone says I have such a feminine face, I brush it off and say, yeah, I'm just a really pretty guy, or yeah, I'm really androgynous. And if they insist, I just smile and nod and pretend I'm not about to throw up from the pain of dysphoria. When discussing my lack of symptoms with my doctor, how my dose of tea isn't doing much, she tells me that if I keep acting like a drug seeker, she'll stop prescribing me meds. Not to mention all the time she's been threatening to stop my treatment because she refuses to give me clear written instruction on how to take my dose and when to get labs, so I mess up, and then it's my fault I'm getting inconsistent treatment. Never mind that my estrogen levels are around ovulating levels and my free testosterone levels are above optimal. It's just like, my estrogen is high, my free testosterone is high. Can I just not have a period? Can we do something about that? You're a drug seeker, my way or the highway. Okay, I guess I'll live with dysphoria then. And like, God, what a mess. Like, it bothers me so much because even just on an aesthetic level, like dudes with makeup are hot. And like androgynous people with makeup are hot. Like everyone, like everyone should wear makeup if they want to. You know what I mean? And it's and I've sort of felt that I've sort of felt that twinge. Like, you know, we were discussing in the gender feels episode that we did, like I don't feel so much of a pressure to fit into feminine stereotypes anymore. But there are times when I'm reminded like, oh my gosh, it might be a little better for me if I did, you know, like if someone misgenders me, it's like, well, is it because I'm wearing a flannel shirt and jeans instead of a dress? Should I just be doing that now? Or is like because I didn't spend enough time on my hair, or because I don't wear makeup anymore? Like, should I do those things just so people don't misgender me? And of course, I'm taking all of the problem on myself, right? It's all my fault. And so again, like I feel like I can't talk about that stuff sometimes. So like, I feel you, friend.
Yeah, I really, really relate to the when someone misgenders me, I smile and let it pass. That whole thing, which I've discussed here on the show. And again, on the Sister Getting Out of Hand, plug Rooney. I just don't want to bring the attention to myself, and I don't want to make the other person feel bad, and I know that I should stand up for myself, and you know, I don't have to be aggressive about it. I can just say, hey, you know, it's not she, it's actually they. But I also feel like just because of my body type and because of the place where I want to be with my body, so I'm transmasculine, but I don't want to be like super buff, I don't want to have a super deep voice, I don't want to have facial hair. I have little whiskers here and there that I shave every day because I don't like facial hair on myself. And so I feel like, you know, I'm 5 feet tall and 100 pounds. I'm going to get gendered as female probably by everybody unless I, you know, I'm sporting a full beard. And then even then, maybe I still might be. So it's hard because you can't control how other people see you. And you have to kind of weigh that balance, I guess, and decide, am I gonna, you know, this person probably doesn't mean any malice. They're just doing what they think is right. They might not even know that singular they is a thing. They might not know to apply that to me. So, you know, I just kind of grin and bear it because often I'm never going to see that person again. But then even when it is someone that I know who should know better, I usually will just wait for them to correct themselves or for someone else to correct them, which sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't.
Yeah, and I feel like
I'm a bad twin.
Right. And I feel like there's an extra layer there for non-binary folks too, because for me, if someone calls me sir, I can just come back with, actually, I'm a ma'am. And
yeah,
9 times out of 10, we can just move on with our lives, right? But if you come back and say, well, actually, it's they, like, wait, what does that mean? Now we have to have a conversation. And so like,
it's a big deal now.
Yeah, you have to weigh that, right? You have to we can't just correct people, you can't just correct people and move on, or at least reliably count on the fact that you can just correct someone and move on, right? A lot of times they're going to start coming back with questions. What does that mean? You know, I don't understand. And then you have to explain yourself when like you're just trying to grocery shop or something.
Yeah. They'll be like, she, and I'll be like, no. And then they'll be like, oh, sorry, he. And I'll be like, no. And they'll be like, what? You're just trying to confuse me.
Head explode. But I mean, I do the same thing too. It's a lesser extent oftentimes. But like, you know, if I'm on the phone with somebody at work and they call me sir, it's like, well, that cuts. I don't like that. It doesn't feel good. But like, I'm probably going to have a 10-minute relationship with you and literally never cross paths with you again, ever, for the rest of my life. And, you know, and then in the back of my head, because I catastrophize a lot and I always think of the worst case scenario, I'm like, well, if I correct this person and I say, well, it's actually she, or, you know, I'm actually a ma'am, and, well, no, you're not. What do you mean? Are you one of those transes? Like, in the back of my head, that's like the likely outcome of me correcting everyone, even though that's not the likely outcome, right? Most of the time people, oh, sorry, and just move on. But yeah, so I mean, it's a calculation every time. Like, do you assert yourself? And I think I've talked about this before too, where, you know, you feel this impulse that like, you know, the person's heart is in the right place. If it's somebody you know, somebody you care for, especially, you know, somebody who knew you before transition, they misgender you accidentally. They obviously mean no malice. It's just, force of habit. I knew you for 28 years as he and your old name, and now you are she and your other name. I 100% respect that, but it's force of habit sometimes, right? There's obviously no malice meant. And so when it happens, I'm still hurt by it, but I know where their heart is, and then I feel bad for being hurt by it. So like,
yeah. It's like, how much do you let yourself be bothered by this? Because you got to weigh their intention against your right to actually be referred to as the way that you are and not be made to feel dysphoric about it.
Well, right. And of course, the conversation always is, we need to extend grace and patience to the people in our lives because it's a huge change, which is not wrong. But it often feels like we are not extended the same grace and patience to be upset when people get it wrong, especially when it's been years and years and years. You know what I mean? Like, yes, you did this. I understand that you meant no malice. It still hurt. And it's okay for me to be hurt by that. It doesn't mean that I think you're a terrible person. It's no different than you stepping on my toe. I don't hate you forever, but it still kind of hurts.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the side of the conversation that never happens is like, I feel like I'm not allowed that. I don't deserve that space to be hurt. Even if it's 100% internalized and I never come out and say like, oh, it really hurt me when you did this, or I'm really angry at you. Like, even if I just keep it to myself, I still feel wrong for just feeling that way. So yeah, there's that.
Also, your doctor is fucky.
Right.
I'm sure you know that, but
right, like
that's fucked up.
Yeah. Emily says, I was talking to the lady at my daycare today about possibly having another baby, and she asked who carried the first one and that if I was going to carry the next one. It's a struggle to decide how much of myself I want to share whenever this comes up, but I just simply said that I can't carry, and we left it at that. And this is new, but this is something I very strongly identify with now. Not specifically the issue of reproduction, but like how much of myself do I share with the people in my lives? We had, I help with new hires at work a lot because I'm in a leadership position. So when we have training classes, they'll say, hey, Callie, can you go in and teach them about X subject? And I went in and the class kind of joked like, well, when we start the class, we go around the class and we share, our name and a little bit about ourselves and one interesting fact about us. And so of course I have a calculation to make at that point because the most important thing in my life, aside from the people in my life, is my activism and the podcast and the fact that like I get to travel all over the country and give talks and try to do what I can to contribute to the conversation around queer and trans inclusion. So like if I meet a random stranger and I feel comfortable enough and they say, well, share an interesting fact about yourself, my initial response is like, I have this podcast and it means a lot to me and I get to do all of these cool things because of it. And even if I just say I have a podcast, obviously everyone's going to ask what the podcast is about.
You have a podcast? What's your podcast about? Right. What's it called? Can I listen to it? Do you have a website? Do you have a Facebook group?
And of course, in work, I don't know anything about these people. You know what I mean? These could be, some of these people could be like horrible, awful anti-trans people that are going to try to get me fired by lying about me, and again, that's me catastrophizing, right? That's not a super likely thing to happen, but it is within the realm of possibility. And so I usually just like, oh, I'm a big Star Trek nerd and I'm learning Klingon. That's the interesting fact about me, you know?
I relate to that so much.
And then the day after that, the supervisor who was training them, just kind of asked for feedback on my performance, like how they felt about the stuff that I taught them. And they all, they said they felt really good about it. And that supervisor decided to share with the class about my podcast, our podcast. And so initially I was like, bro, what the fuck? That's not your story to share. But then I thought to myself, okay, literally every signal I've ever given is that this is something that I'm proud of and want to share with people. So like, he wasn't wrong to think that that would be a thing I would be okay with people knowing. Because this was right after I flew out to Houston to be on Ariane Foster's show, and like some folks in the call center thought that was cool because there are lots of sports fans there, and so like he like pulled up YouTube and showed this video of me on Ariane Foster's podcast, and so my first reaction was like, man, fuck you. That's not your story to tell. I don't want people in the new hire class knowing that. And then I just thought to myself like, wow, that is a really new feeling for me, because before, I didn't want to share that stuff. It was always out of fear. And when I thought about like, why am I not okay with this? And the more and more I thought about it, the more and more I was just like, I just don't know that it's relevant anymore. Like, I don't know that I want those folks knowing that I'm trans, not because I'm ashamed of it or because I'm afraid of people knowing. That it's just like, I don't know if I want that to be important in that part of my life at work anymore. And which is, I mean, I did a video that was posted on the corporate intranet about being a trans employee at our company. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
again, like, it's not like I have sent any signals to anyone saying that this is a thing I'm not okay with people knowing, right? So, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not mad about him doing that. You know what I mean? It's just, it's a new feeling for me that I'm like, I feel like I want to have a little bit more control over how much of that stuff that I share with people in my life, especially at work, which is such, in a lot of ways, it's such a separate environment from the rest of my life, which obviously makes sense. But like, I have people I work with that I consider friends that like know all the details about surgery because I'm close to them and I consider them friends. Obviously, a new hire class full of people I don't know is different. But like, we work in a call center, people talk, like, people gossip. So it's like, if it's out to anyone, it's gonna be out to everyone. And like, you just kind of have to accept that, right or wrong. But yeah, that was a really interesting thing for me. And it happened again with this last new hire class. It was like, gosh, do I share about my podcast? And I'm like, no, like, I don't know that I want to have that conversation with these folks. So I was just like, yeah, I'm learning Klingon. I'm learning a fictional language because that's how much of a freaking nerd I am. So like,
I had a really similar experience just earlier this week in a class. So one of my classes that I'm taking this semester for my master's is a trauma class because I'm studying psychology. And so we've got the double deuce of me being a trauma survivor and having PTSD taking this class. So sometimes I will share personal things in there, but usually I'll try to keep it a little bit more vague. Just because I guess because I'm like, you're not my therapist and this is a class. Right. So like, I'm not here to talk about my issues. But so we were talking about gender, what we thought might be like gender role differences when it comes to responding and how we view ourselves as people when we go through a trauma. So like, boys might be encouraged to just kind of, just tough it out, buck up, don't cry about it, just get over it. Whereas girls or women might receive a little bit more caring, a little bit more understanding, a little bit more emotional support in that area. And so, he brought up this question, how might these gender roles affect people differently? And then he said, keeping in mind that we have, transgender people in this class, and then looking at me, and there's only 4 people in the class, and they all know I'm trans. They're all in my cohort. This professor knows I'm trans. I haven't had a class with him before, but he was there, during the orientation when I introduced myself and told everyone, they, them pronouns. And I'm sure people have been talking about it and stuff. So, part of me was like, yay, he acknowledged that there's like other people in here who might not relate to this question. And then at the same time, I was like, yeesh, attention, don't want.
Right.
No attention, please. So it's kind of a weird thing. Like, I don't know if he was asking a question about athleticism. There are 2 people in that class who are athletes and one who's like a nationally ranked runner. And if he were to be like, keeping in mind that we have athletes in this class, I wouldn't think twice about that. I'd be like, oh yeah, they're athletes. Like there's nothing weird or shameful about that. But then when he brings up, we have a transgender person in this class, so keep that in mind. I'm like, oh God, that's weird and shameful.
Right. Oh God, what a shit show society is. And the last story I want to share is from our dear friend Marissa McCool. And the reason I chose this one to share last is because it really relates to the topic of my talk from this meetup. And so I'll just read what Marissa wrote. I have at times felt a tremendous amount of pressure to not be having a hard time with things due to the way I have came out and have spoken since. And for context, Marissa came out by yelling at a hate preacher and posting a video of it online. So like, that's the context, right? So the impression you might get is that she's an extraordinarily open and proud and unapologetic person, which she is, but obviously there's more there. So that's the context if folks don't get where that's coming from. A lot of this came from being shamed for talking about my vulnerability and struggles. Granted, a lot of that shame was from someone trying to scam me multiple times, but still, if I said I was super happy about my job or transition success, I'd get spare some thoughts for the people who aren't so lucky. And if I was going through a hard day, I'd also get, you have so many people who love and support you and I have no one, so how dare you feel this way? It got to a point where I felt like I couldn't be vulnerable on any level due to having a relative level of privilege and visibility within the trans community because others had it worse. But when someone accused me of not giving back, I lost it. I donated to 20 GoFundMe's alone last year, and we started a nonprofit specifically to give back. That's been the sugarcoating pressure I've felt, that if I don't sugarcoat it, I'll be accused of being ungrateful or whiny. And I will say that this sort of pressure for me has been mostly self-imposed. I've had some comments here and there when I try to celebrate my wins or the good things that happen in life. People run in to be like, well, just keep in mind that other people aren't so lucky, as if that's not a thing that I do, because I very much do. And that's part of the reason we do what we do, is to make sure that more and more folks have that access. But also, to be struggling, because I am an extraordinarily privileged person. Money is not really a worry for me, even though I'm not rich. I'm definitely not struggling. I've been able to access every transition related step that I've wanted to access with a relatively low level of gatekeeping. I've experienced some, but definitely not to the extent that others have. And, so it's always in the back of my head when I talk about something like that it comes off as ungrateful, or that other people have it so much worse. And this is, almost everyone does this, right? I'm not allowed to struggle with the things that I'm struggling with because so many people have it worse, and I'm so much luckier than so many other people. I should just be grateful for what I have. And I think there's kind of two things implicit in that I think are wrong. The first being that if you have struggles, that means you're not grateful, right? I think that's an entirely false premise, because as you're going to hear in the talk, I'm extraordinarily grateful for having been able to have my bottom surgery, but I've run into a lot of struggles that I didn't expect. And 6 months out, I'm not as far along in the healing process as I had hoped I would be. And I'm very frustrated by that. And I've been struggling a lot with it. And I don't want to say I've been dishonest about that struggle, because I have talked about it, but I've definitely talked about it less than I wanted to, because of the fear of so many folks in our community came together to help Celeste and I do this on an emotional level and a financial level. And if I come back and be like, oh, look how fucking horrible this has been, which that's that's an exaggeration.
Woe is me.
Well, fuck you. I shouldn't have helped you. And again, so much of this pressure is self-imposed, right? I don't have a chorus of people telling me how I'm wrong for feeling a certain way. I think Marissa has certainly experienced this more than I have, and we've had some private conversations where I've seen some of the stuff that she's talking about, and it's disgusting. But that's the fear that sort of inspired the talk that I'm giving. Ari, did you have thoughts?
Man, yeah, that's something. When it comes to being trans, when it comes to my mental health, when it comes to, for example, polyamory is something that sometimes I feel a little bit that I shouldn't talk too much about, because I feel like it may come off as I'm bragging, hey, I have 2 partners and you have none and you're so lonely and wah, I'm the best. Or sometimes I'll want to talk about how, just because of my trauma background and everything, I have trouble feeling like I'm deserving of love, or that people really love me. And then people will be like, what the fuck? You have 2 partners. Shut the fuck up. Don't complain ever again.
Right.
And I totally get that, because sometimes I feel the same way. If I see somebody who is doing something with their life that I am jealous of or envious of, that I would love to be able to do, that I can't do for whatever reason right now, or I'm working towards it, and they are complaining about it. They're saying oh, this is hard and this is stressful and I want to quit and go do something else. I'm like, what? I would kill somebody to be able to do what you're doing. So I totally understand that impulse, and I don't really know where the appropriate line is, or if there is an appropriate line. I don't know, I guess just like be friends with people who aren't shitty and aren't gonna judge you for shit.
Right.
And like, if they do, you can always talk to them privately and be like, hey, that wasn't cool. But I totally understand where you're coming from with that, because like if I were single and looking for a partner and felt very lonely and I saw somebody else complaining about how tough it is having two partners, I'd be a little angry too. So I guess we can work out some kind of compromise there.
Right. Yeah, I go through this process pretty much every time I give a talk. It does not matter how far ahead I prepare. I had my sex discussion talk written literally a month beforehand. Like I had it all written out. It was all finished. And I went back to start reading and rehearsing it. And I was just like, this is not the talk that I want to give. It's not the one that I'm feeling. As much as like this is a religious reference, it wasn't what was on my heart. You know, and almost every time I look at something that I'm about to do and I don't feel good about it, it's because there's not enough vulnerability in there. There's not enough of real me inside it. And like this talk was a lot of like, oh, let's joke about sex and vaginas because that's funny. And like it is, you know, it wasn't a bad talk. Like if I had given the talk, people probably would have enjoyed it, but like it wasn't where I was at. It wasn't where I honestly was in my head. And so like I literally like Control A for select all, backspace, let me delete all 3,500 words of this. Holy shit, no! I have 9 hours to write it again. Like and I gave the honest talk, the one that was where I was really at. And when I do stuff like that, it's always scary, but I never regret it. Like literally not once have I regretted being extra vulnerable in a talk. And of course, that a lot of that's because I have the privilege to do so. I take emotional risks when I do this kind of stuff, but I'm not risking my stability or you know, my meal ticket or anything like that. And that's a privilege that I'm grateful to have and that I recognize. But that's where my head's at. So the talk you're about to hear was given at the Tri-State Freethinkers. They called the event "I Want Your Sex, Not Your Discrimination," which I think is fantastic. If there's a video of it up by the time we release the episode, I'll link it in the show notes. I don't know if there will be, but here's the audio of that talk.
Okay, so this is the sex meetup, right? And there's no TMI between friends. So if you're comfortable, raise your hand if you've had an orgasm in the last month. If you're comfortable, share. Right? In the last week? Most people, right? Ask me when the last time I had an orgasm was. July fucking 30th. Shocking, right? Last year. That's an important detail, thank you. Right, yeah. No one's more horrified by this information than I am. And as Jim pointed out, anybody who remembers my talk from last year will remember my high level of excitement about getting my brand new shiny science vagina installed. And the reason I know the actual date of my last orgasm is because it was the night before I had that surgery. And while it's safe to attempt sexy things 3 months post-surgery, that doesn't necessarily mean you have the ability to do sexy things 3 months post-surgery. Frankly, I'm still pretty numb in some pretty important places for that kind of thing. They say it can be about a year or so before you heal enough to function sexually. Of course, I knew this going in, but the idea of waiting a year to have an orgasm and the actual fucking dystopian hellscape of waiting a year for an orgasm are not the same thing, right? So this got me thinking about the ways that transition is often portrayed in the mainstream media. If we were to believe some more popular media portrayals of transition, we might see transition like the old-timey metaphor of a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly, right? We start in one place and emerge, at least on the outside, as our more true selves. And I don't think this is a terrible comparison necessarily, at least not for some people. I think plenty of people would describe their experiences differently because everyone's experience is different, right? But I think the butterfly thing does fit for me, but it's not for the reason you're probably thinking. So, little bit of science. Did you know that the transition process of a caterpillar into a butterfly literally involves the use of hormones for it to fucking digest itself? right? That's like the most hardcore shit ever. Basically, a hormonal process triggers the liquefaction of the caterpillar, and there are these sleeper cells inside it that wake up and feed on the liquefied remnants of the caterpillar to form this new butterfly creature. And like, there aren't going to be any feel-good pieces in the Huffington Post about that description of the process and how it metaphorically relates to transition, but speaking for myself, that's a brilliant way to describe it. So much of my true self was hidden somewhere inside me, sometimes sleeping, sometimes knocking on the inside of the closet door, begging to come out, and at some point in my life, that self decided to break down the fucking door, demolish the parts of me that weren't who I was, and I emerged my whole and true self. And it's really easy to get misty-eyed and sentimental about that process, and if you listen to my podcast, you know that's certainly a thing I do. But frankly, the process is often ugly as shit. It's important to celebrate our wins and talk about the positive changes that transition makes in trans folks' lives, but I think it's equally important to own the ugliness that can exist throughout that process. Now, I've worked out 2 titles for my talk tonight. The first one is Lessons Learned from a Life Lived Through the Looking Glass. And that is, of course, a super wordy and super pretentious way to say that my life has been pretty fucking weird lately, and I've learned some stuff along the way. If you prefer a more direct title, I also like My Vagina, a Metaphor for Life. I'll let you decide which fits better. I'm about 5 years into my transition at this point, so speaking strictly in the sense of time, I'm still pretty new to this whole thing. I'm 33 years old, so that's like 15% of my life. And my experience post-surgery is like 10% of that 15%. But when I think back over my life of the past 6 months, it's actually a pretty great microcosm of the rest of my transition experience. And I have learned some pretty important stuff along the way. One of those things is something that I've already kind of said. It's okay to own the ugliness of your experience. You don't have to sanitize your life to make it more easily digestible for others. And of course, this doesn't mean that you browbeat anyone in your vicinity with whatever awfulness is going on in your life. Other people have stuff going on too, and we don't want to unfairly burden other people, but we don't have to hide ourselves to benefit others either. I've had other trans folks tell me that I need to be careful what I say about my surgery experience, because anything less than a Stepford Wives level of enthusiasm for the process could be seized upon to justify denying us the care that we need. Someone could point at me and say, well, look, there's one of them transgenders done had surgery and ain't happy, it don't work. Bullshit. My feelings are valid, good or bad. My struggles are valid. And it's okay for me to inhabit those struggles and talk about them honestly. A picture of the trans experience is simply incomplete without that piece of the conversation. It's been 192 days since my surgery, and there's not a single day among them that I haven't been in pain. Sometimes it's a bit of soreness, and sometimes it completely wipes me out. I bled from my shiny new science vagina every single day up until about a week ago. I'm also very, very afraid that I might end up as the 1% to 2% of people who never regain sexual function after sex reassignment surgery. For the first month or so, if I waited more than 5 minutes to go to the bathroom, I'd pee myself. Dilating was so painful at first that I'd start shaking and crying just looking at my dilator. By the time I'd start to get used to one size dilator, and dilating only meant a little bit of soreness, time to move up to the next size and start the process all over again. It hurts. A lot. I developed a mild dependence on the opioids that were prescribed to me for pain. When I stopped them, I got diarrhea, which felt great next to my vagina, which at this point was little more than a functional open wound. Another wonderful side effect of opioid withdrawal is insomnia. I didn't sleep right for 2 weeks, because who needs sleep after a major surgery that radically alters your body and has such huge emotional weight, right? And it is, of course, important to point out that I've had truly wonderful experiences as well. But what service would I be doing to the cause of normalizing the trans experience if I didn't acknowledge and own the difficulty involved in some of the steps that we take to transition? Another lesson I've learned is the value and the necessity of asking for help. We live in a deeply individualistic society, a toxically individualistic society. Some of us are taught that it's weak to need help, and some of us are taught that we don't deserve that help. And this is a toxic mix of messages that often ends up, in my case, with prolonging our convalescence or even just making ourselves more miserable than we have to be across a lot of different situations in life. And I had no choice but to unlearn this post-surgery. It wasn't the first time I've been totally dependent on someone else, but it was by far the most dependent I've ever been on someone else, and for the longest time. For about a month, I was a peeing, pooping, eating, and crying machine. My mom and my fiance's mom graciously agreed to take care of both of us when we were recovering. And for them, it was no big deal, right? Generally speaking, that's the kind of thing good moms do. They take care of their babies, right? But I'm 33 years old. I'm not supposed to need that kind of care. And I felt a little twinge of guilt every time I asked for food or for water or for help cleaning myself after going to the bathroom. There's a really great comic that I see make the rounds on Facebook sometimes. Y'all might be familiar. It's called Stop Saying Sorry, Say Thank You. And the idea is to reframe your guilt into gratitude. So instead of saying, sorry I'm such a burden to you, say, thank you for caring for me. And obviously nothing you can say or do flips a switch and fixes those feelings automatically, right? But I spent a lot of time thinking on this message during the first few months of my recovery, and it's something that I still try to apply to my life every day. And the final lesson that I've learned from this experience I want to share with you is that less than 100% can be enough. I will explain. The simple fact is that for many trans folks, our transition efforts still leave us less than satisfied with the bodies we have. And I hear what you're thinking, welcome to humanity, right? Basically, no one is 100% happy with their bodies or themselves in general. And you are, of course, right to think that. But one thing we know is that trans folks are often held to a different standard than our cisgender counterparts. We feel constant pressure to do a good job living up to our respective gender stereotypes, to be seen as real, and to justify the process we go through to align our bodies and our lives with who we really are. Oftentimes, coming out simply means you jump from one set of expectations to another. There's a picture that we get of the good and respectable trans person. We're supposed to be binary. We're supposed to be uncomfortable in our bodies, whether or not that's actually how we feel. We're supposed to want surgery. We're supposed to have all our problems go away once we access whatever transition-related care we want. We're supposed to be eager and grateful for the chance to educate people at every turn and on demand. And what I'm talking about here is freeing ourselves from this need for perfection in the eyes of a society that wasn't built for us in the first fucking place. Lamenting the fact that I have visible scars leading into my vagina doesn't mean I regret doing it. It just means the process isn't perfect. It's coming to peace with getting most of the way there. Because at the end of the day, I have indeed found that most of the way there is more than enough. Now, hearing this talk alone may make it sound like it's a deeply unsatisfying process to transition, or that it comes with so much baggage that it may not be worth undertaking. And if you heard only this talk, I would understand that. The reason I felt these things necessary to say is that if you've ever listened to me talk about my surgery experience on my podcast or in other forums, it's been largely a pretty glowing review. And it's not that I was lying when I said those things. I really am happier in my body than I've ever been. Despite all I've described here, I'd go through this process again in a heartbeat, even knowing how difficult it would be. It's just that the stuff I've talked about previously isn't necessarily the entire story. I felt compelled to share the good stuff because that's what people need and want to hear. I have the most amazing and supportive community, including many folks in this room. I'm scared to death of letting my community down. And much of this plainly wouldn't have happened without your support. And I'm scared to death of seeming ungrateful by speaking ill of the things I've gone through over the last 6 months. But if you know me, I'm the one who always preaches about being real at all costs, right? I'm the one who preaches the value of the fullest possible picture of the human experience, and specifically the trans experience. So there's mine, warts and all. Thank you.
That, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto. We are a proud member of the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative. We're a group of trans podcasting badasses working to bring more trans voices into podcasting and other content creation. Search for the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative on Facebook for more info. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at podcast@thegaytheistmanifesto.com. I'm on Twitter at Gaytheist Callie. You can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. We have a brand new shiny website at thegaytheistmanifesto.com. And Ari's got a thing.
Well, everyone, you heard me talk about the class I'm taking, the trauma class. And as part of that class, in a few weeks, my 3 classmates and I will be giving a workshop at a domestic violence center, teaching people how to avoid secondary traumatic stress and burnout. And as part of that, I am compiling a list of self-care tips. So here it is for you, the exact list of self-care tips that I will be giving to these domestic violence advocates.
Oh, God.
Eat regular, healthy meals. Get 8 to 9 hours of sleep every night. Keep your living environment clean and uncluttered. Have my dog, but you can't because she's already mine and you missed out. But you can friend me on Facebook for gratuitous pictures, videos, and updates about whatever new great thing she did today to continuously exceed the bounds of perfection. Today, it was getting in the car all by herself twice. What a good girl. Reach out to a safe and trusted friend when you feel down. For example, you can email me at aristillman4@gmail.com for feedback, questions, or your most persuasive but incorrect argument for why Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is superior to Full Metal Alchemist. Do a 5-minute guided meditation when you feel stressed. There are hundreds of free ones available on YouTube. Accept the sufferings of life and laugh mockingly into the void, as the void can no longer hurt you. Ask a cis person in your life, who even came up with cisgenderism anyway? And watch them squirm like the little cis squirmy wormies that they are. And if that tip appeals to you, you can listen to The Cis Are Getting Out of Hand for more cis-bashing feel-goodery. As you mentioned earlier, Callie, practice talking to yourself the way you would try to talk to a close friend. Be understanding and compassionate with yourself, and try not to beat yourself up for making human mistakes. And finally, avoid wasting your time with activities designed to numb your heart and mind, such as listening to the SJW Circle Jerk. Instead, do something nice for someone you love, like taking their phone away and deleting all the episodes that they have downloaded of the SJW Circle Jerk. Remember, pro-social purpose is essential to maintaining motivation and well-being.
Legit. That's good advice. If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. Make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. And if you can't do that, you can still head over to iTunes, give us a 5-star review that helps us move up in the rankings and get heard by more people. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.